He thinks like an architect, an inventor, an engineer, and a sculptor. But internationally acclaimed designer Thomas Heatherwick is not quite any of these things. His designs are responses to questions.
We wondered whether it was possible to make something that was fully rotationally symmetrical, that was also a seat.
Some answers are small as a chair, some as big as a university campus. But it's creations like this one that have given him cutting-edge status around the world. He created the unconventional cauldron that held the Olympic flame for the 2012 Games.
The biggest headache, I guess, for us, in that it meant we were designing 204 cauldrons, not one.
And just 2 years earlier, his so-called hairy UK pavilion for the Shanghai World Expo won him an award for Best Site Design. He's even recently modernized the UK's iconic Routemaster bus. This week on Talk Asia, we're with Thomas Heatherwick at the site of his multi-million-dollar project in Hong Kong. Plus, we follow him to London to get a rare peek into the mechanics of the Design Masters creative team.
This is my studio. I'll show you around.
Thomas, welcome to Talk Asia. Thank you for spending some time with us. And we are here in one of your creations. And it begs the question, though, what do we call you? An architect, an inventor, a designer? How do we define you?
Oh, I'm squinting because, I suppose the verb of what I do is I design, and but I don't mind what somebody calls what me and my team do. And so the kinds of projects we're working on at the moment, we're designing a new pier. We're designing, we've been working on a power station, and we have just finished a bus, as well as designing a hotel. So you can tell me what I do better, maybe.
These ideas and those projects, one of which was seen perhaps by an estimated audience of about 4.8 billion people. I'm talking about the London Olympics and that cauldron, the Olympic Cauldron, which some would say would be the pinnacle of the Olympic Games. How did that idea come to you?
Danny Boyle came to the studio, and I'd not met him before, and he said that his opening ceremony was going to very much be about connecting with the athletes and spectators coming together in peace of these 204 countries. And so it just somehow very quickly seemed obvious to us that we should try to find an idea rather than a shape or a style. And that idea was to celebrate that coming together, and the best way to do that was to not have a singular big fat object, but to make something out of 204 pieces. Hello, I'm Thomas Heatherwick. This is my studio. I'll show you around. The team is made up of architects and designers, and we start by looking at trying to figure out how to begin a project with what philosophy to take. And so there's a lot of the thinking at the beginning isn't jumping to start drawing or making models, but to think what angle to approach a project.
I think one of my favorite designs of yours is the rolling bridge in Paddington. I think the first time I saw that, I was gobsmacked, because not only by the actual movement of it, but when you see it roll into a wheel. I started to wonder who would be this person who would create something like this, who would design, and where would that thought process come from? I read somewhere that you start most of your projects with a question. It's not a brief or anything, but it's with a question. How has your thought process changed over the years?
When I first started and set up the studio, I was much more alone. Now I work with 85 people, but when I started, there was me plus one or two people, and you very much felt by yourself thinking about projects. And I felt that I was a bad designer because I found it so hard when I was just working by myself in isolation, and colleges are particularly bad for that because students are very much sitting there by themselves trying to be brilliant or trying to do something, whereas it came alive for me when, for example, there was a structural engineer who used to come into the Royal College of Arts, and he'd come in and sit and look at what you were doing and get interested and get excited about it, and then you'd respond, and then he'd respond, and then you'd respond, and he'd respond, and before you knew it you were growing something. It's almost like we sit here now, it's almost like through the discussion you grow something, and it's suddenly by experimenting with ideas or sort of thought experiments, or I think there's a romance at the idea of the lone genius who has a big pen and a big piece of paper and does this. But yes, I can draw, and yes, we sketch, but where things really come out is through the strategic ideas that we generate together that then lead us to things. I'm interested in this sort of infrastructure that roots and glues things together rather than just another fancy art gallery. And that's why when we had this chance to work on the new London bus, and there were lessons we could learn from the bus from 50 years ago, but no designer had been allowed for 50 years to coordinate and try to give back dignity to the passenger. I don't feel that my urge or my studio's urge is to express myself and do Thomas projects and where shall I stick one of our projects. I'm interested in the gaps that are around us, and when you see something, why is that like that? That could be better.
I would love to spend an hour in your brain just to know how it works, because it's fascinating just the way you think about everything. But I guess I'm just curious about, what was your favorite toy as a child?
I was brought up in a big rambling house where there was space to collect things and accumulate things you're interested in. In a way, the studio in London now is just an extension of my bedroom from when I was 5 or 6. It was a workshop then. The studio in London now is a workshop. We have lots of computers and there's lots of architects and things, but we have a big space where we make things, test ideas, make prototypes, maquettes, models, and generally see what we're doing as wondering about the world. For me, it's the extraordinary thing about Hong Kong, this mix of scales and levels of ambition and intensity.
One of the beautiful things about this place is we can walk out and see this amazing skyline.
I mean, this, for me, is the extraordinary thing about Hong Kong, this mix of scales and levels of ambition and intensity, and it's all compressing with then Jungle Mountain as a backdrop.
There's something that's about Hong Kong, it's constantly changing, it's constantly new. How do you keep redesigning new?
It's quite rare that things can't be better, and so when organisations are ambitious, they will keep going back and looking back at themselves and looking at ways to make things better. And I'm very distrusting of people who don't keep self-analysing and keep looking at the work they do, the projects they create, and thinking how they could be better.
What's particular and special and unique for a particular location can also be tied in with tradition. And you talked about culture as well. But tradition and modernity are two different things. How do you maintain tradition?
It's particularly important to know when not to grab some local, historical, obvious trigger, because I think that it's almost disrespectful of local tradition if you think you can just come and grab it and do a bit of it into your project. I also believe that we make our own traditions and customs. That doesn't mean everything's a square cold box looking like it's landed on the moon, but it's about trying to be genuine and particular to that place. That, more than anything, to me, it feels the greatest respect you can do for a project in a community with people who are going to be in and around it.
It's been a pleasure, Thomas. Thank you so much.
Thank you.